Welcome to On Topic, a series of conversations with experts on issues of importance to Alaska. I'm Jim Johnson, president of the University of Alaska, and this series of conversations with distinguished scholars and practitioners has been created in collaboration with the University of Alaska and the University of Alaska Press. In this segment, we'll be exploring the topic of rhetoric and storytelling. How do we win the hearts and minds of people through the written word? My guest is Paula Mathieu, English professor in the Morrissey College of Arts and Sciences at Boston College, and director of the first-year writing program and founder of the Writing Fellows program there. You talk about hearts and minds. In a lot of my work, it's Excel spreadsheets and PowerPoint presentations, and I've increasingly been persuaded and completely believe that narrative and storytelling is more powerful even for affecting hearts and minds of people.
Right.
What's your take on that?
Well, it's been humbling because I'm a rhetorician by training, so I study persuasion. I study how people are persuaded, and more research is really showing that information actually has the opposite effect on people, and that beliefs are very deeply rooted in identity and sort of their sense of kinship in a group or a community. And so there was a study of people who didn't want to vaccinate their kids, and the more they were given information and facts, the less likely they were to vaccinate their kids. So it pushed them further and further into their own positions.
Right.
So it's been humbling for me to think, okay, I had taught courses in argumentation, and to really think, like, well, what am I actually teaching a useful skill? Is that how people are persuaded? And I really have found that it's through stories and it's through personal connections. When you know someone who's been homeless, you think of homelessness in a different way. When you know someone who's been incarcerated, you think about the problem of incarceration or the issues in different ways. And I think when we see people as part of our community, we're going to make more compassionate and better choices about what needs to happen or how resources should be allocated. And I think we see each other more through stories than we do through just facts and data.
So what gives you hope as you look forward? I mean, clearly you have passion for your work. You're bringing a very rigorous intellectual background and approach to it. But as you work with not only your students, but people in the community and here in Alaska, what gives you hope?
Well, a lot of things. I think one, I always learn from people smarter than me, and I think that's, and I remember hearing very smart scholars of color saying, well, not having hope is a privilege. So the idea that to say, well, I'm hopeless, or that's someone who's in a comfortable enough position that they can live without hope, that their day-to-day life doesn't depend on that constant kind of tenacious reinventing and going out and facing. And so that I've always held very close, to not see hope as a choice, because it's an orientation.
I appreciate very much that thoughtful response, as I'm sure, you're dealing with people in difficult situations. Your work in Boston, obviously, but here in Alaska. I was reflecting as I was listening to you, how in the United States in particular, from early days, we've been different than folks in other countries in that we do come together as community organizations. Again, as a political scientist, I go back to Tocqueville, who was a French scholar who came to America and said, wow, these people identify challenges and they come together. Almost spontaneously, they come together in their communities and work on issues. And it sure seems like you're in that grand tradition of the work you're doing.
Rebecca Solnit, who's an amazing writer, has a book, and it looks at disasters. It looks at Katrina and how the media kind of portrayed in that moment of Katrina, of people looting and this kind of very racist depiction of what was going on in New Orleans, and they really looked, and none of it was true. It was all that when they really looked, that people did amazingly come together, and but it was the fear stoked by these news stories had people blocking paths out of New Orleans because they had these fears of, the fleeing, hordes of people stranded in the city, and so that we need to tell better stories. And she talks about we need to break the story. So that was a story that, the poor African Americans, looted and destroyed New Orleans. That was not a true story. And she said, as journalists, we needed to break that story. And they did, and it's an amazing book. But what she said is what really happens over and over again in moments of big, horrible tragedies, people become very kind. People come together. That doesn't last forever, but that was what she found both in Katrina, and then she compared that to the San Francisco earthquake, and looking at that. So I think that's really true.
Well, thank you so much for your time here today, and for all the work you're doing here in Fairbanks, but also because there were folks from across the state for Alaska.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it, and we hope that we stay connected with you because you're doing important work for society. And
well, I love Alaska. This is my first visit here, and I've been here a week, and it's been amazing. And so thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for wanting to sit down.
Oh, yeah. And we look forward to seeing you back.
Okay, great.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Okay.
Really appreciate it.
Bye. No, thank you.